So thank you everyone who is joining us at the moment. We appreciate you taking the time out of your busy days to be here. We are lucky to be joined by Susan Edwards, who is an occupational hygienist and has carried out some noise monitoring with the scaffolding team. We also have Chris Palazzo, who is the infamous ergonomist with the Work Should Not Hurt team. And we have Lisa Searup, who is an audiologist with Ears Hearing, who specialise in hearing conservation. So this amazing team will be sharing their expertise and insights with us today. I will now hand over to the team to start.
So my first thing is, why should we care about noise and hearing loss? And the first thing, and there should be a video at this point, talks about conversation and communication. Hearing is what we use for good communication. So the reason we need good communication is hearing is the basis of all good communication. ACC states that with only 5% hearing loss, it impairs your ability to communicate. Your ears help you know where you are in space, know where others are in relation to you. You can ask somebody to help you, hand me that hammer. You can alert somebody, watch out, that thing, the board is falling. Oftentimes we find when you've been up and down that scaffolding 400 times, there's a tendency to, that hammer's just out of reach because you know the person behind next to you can't hear it. And then you do some dangerous behaviors. You can actually inform people that they're not being safe. Hey, Joe, that's your carabiner's not clipped in. If you had to get up and walk up and tell them that, you're less likely to do so. But if you can kind of yell, check that carabiner, you're more likely to get those safety factors. Probably the most important things for scaffolding, rigging, is it's about balance. So when you're not hearing as well, you often have problems with your balance. And we all know that scaffolding balance is a key component to safety. One of the things that is those catastrophic problems if you have. So that's why we should care. It improves your productivity, it improves your safety. And with that one, I'm going to hand over to Chris and for his insights. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, thanks, guys. Chris Pelagic. So I'm an ergonomist and I've really sunk myself into scaffolding the last couple of years, thanks to people like Dave Sopp here on this call. And I noticed two things about scaffolding. First thing is, man, scaffolders lift a lot of heavy equipment all day, every day, over a ton a day. It's amazing. There's no other profession that I know of, no other trade that has such a huge demand on their body. Second thing I notice is, bloody hell, scaffolding is noisy, which was reinforced to me this morning, actually, when I was at home hearing scaffolding being erected about 10 doors down from me, down the road. Not only was I inside, but I was actually in the shower at the time, behind double glazing, and I could still hear scaffolding clanging around. Scaffolding is noisy. I've come to that conclusion, and I'm privileged to be with these two noise experts today talking to you about that. I mean, some of you scaffolders might not even realise, because it's just a real part of your job and what you do. And as Lisa says, communication's extremely important. I just happen to have two bits of scaffolding here, and I think I can make a noise with my mic nipped off. So can you hear that?
Yep.
These clanging noises, if you could hear that, these noises are constant and apparent throughout the day, and they're all impact noises. So I had a bit of a think. I thought, well, where is this noise happening? So I'll just share my screen. And basically, I've come up with a few spots where the impact noise is happening in scaffolding, and this diagram sort of explains it. So on the left here, we've got a scaffolder's ear, and the closer that the sound is to a scaffolder's ear means the more likely that is to be damaging noise, if it's at the right levels. So thinking about noise that's really close to a scaffolder's ear, the first thing that I've observed is loading gear onto your shoulder, right next to your ear. The clanging of small pieces and big pieces in close proximity to your ear. And the thing about loading those small pieces is not only are you loading it constantly, giving yourself little clangs in the ear, but when you unload it and dump that load down onto the deck of a truck or onto the ground, you get a whole cacophony of sound again through that noise. So just a little bit further away, we've got some more noise that's happening that's of concern. Primarily that's striking the pins in system scaffolding. Can I say that system scaffolding seems to be extremely noisy as compared to tube and clip, and it's clanging and impact. And I think some of that's due to the rosettes that is set in a scaffolding standard in a system scaffolding standard. Second form of noise quite close by is obviously the use of a drill and a ratchet drill. And ratchet drills are not air friendly. Not air friendly to users of ratchet drills or people working around people that are using these ratchet drills. And then obviously there's the dropping of pieces either down from your shoulder or down on the ground or down onto another bit of scaffold. And then as we come a bit further out from the ear, there's the noise of installing decks above your head and just fitting that deck, that last fit where it clangs above your head. There's the noise of loading and unloading stillages and trucks. And that's sort of accentuated by the system scaffold and the rosettes, and obviously straightening decks, usually with your hammer and your leg, stomping it back into place, causes a loud impact noise. And then in general, further away from the ear, we've got our other scaffold buddies working around us and talking and doing all of these same noises. And all of this noise contributes and collects and starts to interfere in communication and scaffolding. And there is no other trade that relies on communication as strongly as scaffolding. It's the number one prerequisite to build a scaffolders for the scaffolders to communicate with each other, passing up gear, sorting out who's where, calling out for more parts, giving instructions. As the guys said, communication is the key. So without further ado, I will come back to the screen and stop sharing. So thankfully, these sort of thoughts that I had about bloody hell, scaffolding's noisy, I wonder if it really is, has kind of been confirmed by the first study of its kind. And we're lucky enough to have Susan here who carried this study out. So Susan, I wondered if you could just tell the good people, what you found in the study.
Fabulous. So as an occupational hygienist, a term some of you may not be aware of, I get called in to help to identify, to measure, and to offer suggestions on how to control different exposures that can cause harm to workers' physical health. So in this case, I was being called in to, there we go, my beeper doesn't work, but the arrow does. So to look at noise around scaffolding. So we did just 1 day's worth of monitoring, 6 workers across 3 different teams for a scaffolding company in Palmerston North. So one team was erecting scaffolding inside school buildings, one erecting and removing scaffolding in relatively quiet outdoor settings, and we also put them on the team that was working in the yard. So in this case, we were using noise dosimeters. So these are little units that sit on the workers' shoulders. A bit problematic when people go to put stuff on their shoulders. We try to use the opposite shoulder, but it is effectively going to collect the noise that workers' ears are exposed to. And it records those across the day, and you can graph them out across the day as well. So just to give you a bit of number context before we have a look at the graphs, the New Zealand workplace noise limits are 85, averaged over an 8-hour workday, or a peak of 140 decibel. So 85 is a noisy restaurant, and the kind of guideline that people give is if you are struggling to have a conversation when you're a meter apart from somebody, then you're in that zone where you could be damaging your hearing. So 140, as an example, stock car races. So these are really loud noises. And as Chris alluded to before, your likelihood of getting hearing loss is an element of, it's like a fire triangle, this is a noise triangle. It's the level of the sound, so that how loud it is, the time you're exposed to it, and how far away you are from it. So in the stock cars, you know, if you're doing it once a year, or if you're doing it for only half an hour, that's different than if you are there and working on a concession stand every day. If your concession stand is out by the car park, you're in a better position than if you're right next to it. So this is one of the graphs that we pulled out for just one of those workers. So the bottom orange shows the averaged noise. So in this case, it's averaged over a minute, and you can see it's still quite spiky. And the one above is that peak noise, so the highest noise measured in each of those minutes. So for this worker, we had an averaged noise level of 86, which is above the 85 limit, and a peak of 135. So when I work with clients, I am generally saying, if you have an average noise above 80 or a peak noise above 130, then your noise needs to be actively managed. And actively managed means you need to educate your workers, you need to try and minimize your noise sources, and you need to provide PPE. So just expanding that out a little bit, this is just a 20-minute snapshot for one of the workers, and you can see it's all impact noise. There's so much little bits of impact noise. So that's your exposure. It's a whole accumulation of impact noises, which is really quite unique when it comes to a noise profile. There's no other industry that I've seen that in. I mean, obviously you get impact across other industries, but your noise is all impact noise. So across those 6 workers, the ones in yellow, they're above my action limit, and the ones in red are above the New Zealand noise limits. So the reality is there is going to be some noise-induced hearing loss in the scaffolding industry. So scaffolding work, there is enough impact noise for noise-induced hearing loss. It didn't matter whether they were yard workers or team leaders or ground workers, they were all exposed to significant levels of noise. And on top of that, there is what both Lisa and Chris have called out, there's a real need for workers to still be able to communicate with each other, which is probably why there's very little in the way of noise protection used currently in the scaffolding industry. So the recommendations from this study in particular were just investigate all the ways you could potentially reduce the noise that's happening. So dead blow hammers, padding, anything that you can think of. Find some hearing protection that works for your workers, that removes impact noises and still allows conversation. Train your workers, reduce about the need to reduce the risks and also how to use PPE. And also carry out audiometry testing. So do yearly ear checks just to make sure that you're not damaging your workers' hearing. Now, if you broaden that out to the whole scaffolding industry, it's really important that this case study was really one of the best case scenarios. There were no other construction noises out there. They were well-trained teams. They didn't use ratchet drills, and they were working 8.5 hours. So the other thing is that if your workers are working, 8, 9, 10 hours, then the effective noise limit actually drops because you have less recovery time between the end of your shift and the start of your next shift. So you could be dropping that way down to much closer to 80. And across scaffolding, we should be looking at all the ways that we can reduce the impact noises and ways to provide training and hearing protection. So as a whole industry, if you're looking at that, it's going to make it a lot easier for the individual companies. And I think the other thing is we really could do with a little more noise monitoring for some of the other teams to get a really good picture of what this looks like across the industry. And just before I hand back again, a quick note. Classes of hearing protection. This is one case where more is not always better. So, I mean, we've said this several times. For scaffolding, Class 5 hearing protection really, really limits both your conversation and your environmental awareness. Class 5, it's really difficult to get anything that's not Class 5, but yeah, we're trying to fight it in all industries, but it's particularly problematic for scaffolders. So what you really need to be looking for is some kind of hearing protection that filters out the impact noises, but allows the conversation. And there are various different companies who have provided various different hearing protection that allows in the quiet zones and the conversation to pass through, but knocks out those impact noises. So back to Lisa. I think I'll stop sharing.
Now, Susan talked about that 85 dB level, and I want to kind of go into that a little bit, because what does that mean? 85, and sound is so nebulous, isn't it? Is that 84, 85? And as you can see from Susan's work, it's a big difference on some of those little sounds. And it's important to note that if you're exposed to that 85 dB level, according to WorkSafe regulations, you need to then stand that worker down for 24 hours, which A, doesn't happen, and B, can't happen. So we need to figure out what we can do to prevent that one. And the other really practical thing that WorkSafe does is says that if you change machines, jobs, or any aspect of that job that may affect noise, you need to do a new noise survey. And Susan and I can both tell you it's too busy to come back and measure your site every time you make one of those little changes, because you'd have us on a full-time payroll at that point. So one of the things I like to
recommend changes every time as well.
It does. So one of the things we need to what I often recommend is there's now an app for that. We know there's an app for just about everything, but there is an app also for noise, and this allows you to measure those changes. I will caution that it does not take the place of a professional noise assessment, and that should be done annually, but it really does allow you to be in compliance with WorkSafe legislation. And the app I recommend most of the time is the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health Noise Meter app. It is only available for an Apple product. And the reason for the Apple product is that it has the most consistent calibration of any of them. There are a lot of good ones now for Android products, and Sound Level Meter is one of my favorite. It just doesn't have quite the same precision as the Apple product does. And that allows you to go through. And so if things change, run through with a dosimeter. Are you having problems? So where is that noise source coming from? I was going to a scaffolding, and the biggest noise level they had was that metal carabiner going back and forth. Oh my God, was that so loud, and about my noise level. But you can now get different ones that are equally as robust, but have a lower sound profile. And reducing it at that level is the most effective hearing protection and noise protection that you can do. So having some guide other than is really good to have. And if you can get down to 80, then hopefully Susan and I and Chris are surplus to requirements, although I tend to feel our jobs are safe. And Chris talked about that location on how close noise is. So with sound, because it's a logarithmic scale and it's an inverse square law, so if you double the distance, you have the sound. It doesn't take a whole lot when it's at that level to make it a little bit less. So when we look at how loud does it have to be, when Chris talks about carrying it up here, that's 1,000 times louder. The things that they have at that level, at ear level, is 120 decibels. That's a shotgun when you're doing that. And I know that the workers do that 100 times a day. So they might as well be in the Army, because you have the same noise exposure if you're shooting guns all the time. But if you simply have it at a lower rate, and even in the arms or wheelbarrows, it's 1,000 times quieter, just to put that in perspective, than if you're carrying it at ear level. So little changes make big differences when you're doing those type of works, especially around impact noises, because they are incredibly loud. And Susan had some 3M products, and you can get some that she had the other day that I was looking at. Another solution that we've kind of looked at is some of the new filtered earbuds. And we have these that we've been bringing in because it allows us to very quickly, and on the job site, you can also measure that and see what is the best for that worker. So they change that acoustic energy into thermal energy and dissipate those impact noises, yet allow you to still hear and have that vital communication that we all know is important. And one of those things you don't think of, I was talking to one of the workers, and he didn't like them at all because he didn't think they were protected, because he's been so used to class 5s where everything in his world is muffled, that when he could hear normally and clearly, he thought this can't possibly be working because I can hear people talk. Although that is the whole purpose of the things, but it is about educating workers when you do get those new ones. But it does solve some of the problem with that comfort. And that one, and they come in even where we can get even Susan's very small ears if we need to. So that is one option. And I was on the job site the other day, one of those things you only learn when you're actually there, and you don't necessarily think about when I'm in my office. I was doing some hearing testing, and 30% of the employees on that job site had a middle ear infection. A lot of them had perforations. They also had dust. So because they also monitored for dust, and this is a really top site, one of the best ones I have for noise and work and compliance. But because they wear class 5s all the time, and when you're at lunch and when you're sitting and you're not in those noisy environments, you can take them off, and that's safe from a hearing protection kind of thing, from a noise-induced hearing loss. But it isn't safe from the dust. And when they had those perforated eardrums, that dust is getting into that ear and causing those infections to be worse. So these guys, and they're hiring the Maui Pacifica, which also have a higher incidence of this noise-induced or of middle ear infection anyway. So these guys were wearing class 5 earmuffs before they even went out the job. So when they had class 5s, and then we put more class 5s, essentially we put them in a little closet and increase the risk of damage. This was a site where you've got machines and conveyor belts and all kinds of things going at a speed of light, where 1 second can make a catastrophic difference. And when these guys have class 5s on top of class 5s, they essentially can't communicate. And I saw a lot of head nodding. So Joe, can you hear that one? Mm-hmm. So Joe, do you like going to Europe tomorrow? Mm-hmm. No idea what I had said. I could have asked him anything. I could have had him sign over his whole estate to me. Yep. And that is a problem, because oftentimes workers don't tell you they can't hear. And I know you all have had that. So checking where that is. There are some earplugs, and I actually use just ones that are closed, for these cases now. It's like I did, it's like, oh, mind blowing. Yes, I didn't even think of that. So you can use just a blank earpiece in that ear, and it costs very little, $5-10. I can't remember what they are, that they can wear all the time, and it doesn't change their communication at all. So they still hear with their class 5s on that one, so they've got their built-in hearing protection. But what it does is keeps that dust out of their ear and reduces the risk of infection. That was my epiphany the other day that I thought I would share with you. Susan or Chris, do you have anything you want to add at this stage?
I just want to show you this. This is a scaffolder's hammer from Germany. It looks really weird compared to a New Zealand scaffolder's hammer, but the key feature is it's got a dead blow Teflon end on it and a metal end. So Teflon on metal vibrates less, makes less sound. That's the premise of it. Plus the handle's quite long compared to the New Zealand scaffolder's handle, which seems to have shrunken quite a lot. So my thoughts are a rubber stopper on the end of your metal hammer will act as a dead blow. There has been some feedback though that the striking's not as positive, but that's something that we have to test. But I know that some of you scaffs out there have to use dead blows in some areas because you don't want to create a spark that's going to set the place on fire. So some are asked to do that. So I think the hammer striking, if we can reduce that across the board with something as simple as rubber caps that go on our hammers, I think we might be onto a winner there, but we've got to actually try that out, get it, do some noise surveys with that adaptation on it and see if we can get that throughout our industry. Yeah, that was my suggestion on hammers. We have a bit of work to do on this one.
So we had one question come through beforehand, just asking around ACC and what the current design costs we can expect from ACC are at the moment. That might be a question maybe for Lisa.
ACC hasn't traditionally supported a lot of changes in design costs, and there's nothing I know of that's in the pipeline at all. What ACC does provide from a hearing perspective is hearing aids. And one thing I learned from Chris the other day, which was really useful and important, is that hearing aids or the noise-induced hearing loss claims are not apportioned to your business. So you don't get any changes in your levies or your safety record if you provide hearing aids and ACC support for your workers. A lot of workers in the scaffolding industry, and I would say the majority of them, would benefit from hearing. And I often you get the most hearing loss in the first 5 to 10 years of your working life, and that's an ACC thing. And if we can get some of these young guys in even before they feel they need the hearing aids, they're at least in the system. And I've told more than one, yeah, give them to your grandpa. I get it, but let's get you in the system at the moment, because that's the most important thing. Especially when Maori and Pacifica only do 5 to 6% of the ACC statistics within noise-induced hearing loss.
Of course, if we can reduce that hearing loss in the first place, that would be even better.
I agree with you 100%, Susan. That would be my ideal thing. I always think my primary job is to put me out of a job.
Excellent. I just had a question actually around the hearing and how the class 5s are quite common. Do you know where people are able to get some of those lower classes from, or where are they all earmuffs, or can you get the different styles?
You can get hearing protection from all of your standard safety providers, but Lisa was talking about specifically some that have the impact noise protection that are earbuds. Most of the ones with impact protection are earmuffs, but for scaffolders, obviously there'd be an advantage in not having something that was sitting there and being bulky around your around your shoulders.
And we do provide the impact noise ones if anybody wants to contact us, and it's Lisa at ears.net.nz.
Perfect. Don't worry, we'll be sure to include that in the comms after this. Just want to thank again Susan, Lisa, Chris. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy days to present on this topic today. Thank you again for taking the time to be part of the session today, and we hope to see you again in the future. So from Sans, ka kite anō.
Ka kite.